to Immigrant Bazaar, a weekly podcast for immigrants by immigrants. In this podcast, we talk about different things that matter to immigrants, and we bring guests that they share their own knowledge and expertise in different subjects. Your host for today's show, as always, myself, Bahram, and
Anwar here. And today I'm happy to introduce a special guest for me personally. He's a close friend of mine, Dr. Ibrahim El-Hedok. Hello, Ibrahim.
Hi, Anwar. Hi, Bahram.
Yeah. Welcome to the podcast, Ibrahim. So I'll give a little bit of background. He's originally from Lebanon, but he's been living in the United States for a pretty long time. My guess is about 13 years. Is that right?
Yeah, 2007.
Yes, 13 years. He's a father of 3 daughters, beautiful daughters, and he has a PhD in chemical engineering. He'll give actually more background on his education, on his career, but he's been happily employed by a couple of employers here in the United States. He has gone through the entire dreadful process of interviewing with a lot of large companies, small companies. So we thought today's episode will be dedicated to the process of interviewing and getting jobs in the United States, how to nail your interview. And I'm happy to pass the ball to Dr. El-Hedok to introduce himself.
Thank you, Anwar. My name is Ibrahim El-Hedok. So I kind of, a little more background. I grew up mainly in Lebanon, although my parents have lived in other places before. So I spent just about 9 years in Lebanon throughout my childhood. So once I was about to finish my high school, I was looking into colleges in many different places. And I was at one point I was studying German. I would apply to United States. I looked at many things, and then I was the time we had the internet back in like the early 2000s. It was just coming in Lebanon. And I looked up and I found, places to study in Turkey. I was surprised that like almost tuition is very low into teachings in English. So why not? I liked the college I went to. It's called Middle East Technical University in Ankara. So I applied to it. Eventually got there, and that's where I met Anwar. So I majored in chemical engineering. Honestly, chemical engineering was the first choice on my application. I did not know what chemical engineering is. I had no idea. So until I got the acceptance letter, then I looked what chemical engineering is. So it's a funny story how I'm in the field. But I ended up, liking it. It's very diverse. Has many. You can go into many different places. And so after I finished my BS degree, my professors encouraged me to apply for graduate school. That's what I did, and I ended up being in Iowa. So I went to Iowa State University.
Of all places.
First there. Yeah, and also at that point, I had no idea what and where. It was just like colleges that we were applying to. So applying plenty of applications, and I got a good offer from Iowa State. So I took that, and that's where I spent, roughly, I think, 6 years. So I did both masters and then a PhD. And they were in different fields. So the master's was in biorenewables, and then I did like PhD in polymers. I finished master's in about 2 years, and then continued on to after that into a PhD program. Then I started my career. I moved up to Minnesota. That was my first job. Was with 3M. I worked there for about 7 years. Moved into different jobs within 3M. So different roles. And then after that, just a year ago, I moved down to Charlotte, North Carolina, where I'm right now with a private company called Mallard Creek Polymers. So using similar skills, but just a different company. And we can get to talk about how maybe my experience at the beginning when I got to 3M, and as well as right now with moving to a different job.
Sounds good.
Awesome. So, yeah, it seems like, just to clarify, we'll probably be talking mostly about white-collar jobs. So we'll probably have a separate episode for blue-collar jobs, different kind of jobs, but this is mostly like corporate jobs, how you nail those interviews. And Ibrahim, how many interviews have you gone through? How many have you had in total?
By now, close to 30 interviews. And but
Okay, that's
into
all.
my first job, I had about 25 of them. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
so it was quite a bit of interviews and preparations, and yeah.
So, Ibrahim, just probably I'll start with some general question to begin with. So I know you said you gave us very detailed experience, background in terms of your education, plus in terms of your, how you started your career here. So, from your experience, give us your suggestions. How does immigrant background, right? Meaning you came from, you from Lebanon, lived in Turkey, then moved to the US. How does it help to nail the interview, right? What do you bring on the table when you walk in the interview and you have your own background, rich background, plus experience in this country? That actually helps. So share that.
Yeah.
Please.
Yeah, I have a very good question. And I got to be asked that at one interview, like what makes you a little different? They ask like what makes you different from other candidates. So I look back at my history, at the choices that I made in my life. So I don't know, I could have just getting out of high school. I just could have taken the easy way and stayed where I am, and like went to like many other people, just went to local colleges and taken that path. But I was willing to take the risk, do my research and take the risk and look for opportunities, and that's what I think separates a lot of immigrants, from yes, as a general character. They're willing to take the risk, and that's and companies are looking for. They're looking for people who are willing to basically, be do their research, take risk, make improvements both in their life and in the company. So um, it's a little difficult at the beginning until you get the interview. Uh, Sometimes people don't appreciate that part. So yes, and the good thing is that more and more companies are looking for diversity. So the companies that are more aligned with diversity appreciate that part and actually sees that. So the more people that are employed in these companies, the more they get to basically have a good connection with that attribute.
I actually have a follow-up question to that, more on the negative side though. So, you bring the risk-taker attitude, and that's probably positive for corporate world because you're not afraid to, take risks that are necessary to take. How about the other flip side? Let's say you did all those things, you come to the States, but your past experience that is non-US is kind of ignored. People, companies don't, even ask questions about it. It is ignored. How do you bring that forward? How do you make sure that that's also counted?
Sure. I mean, during the interview, you get to be asked a lot of questions, and they may ask you about the most relevant or U.S.-based experience. But when you get less, especially when they ask you this hypothetical or kind of something, tell me about a time you had, a challenge. Tell me. So it's always nice to bring that up. So you have to kind of tell them the story and bring it up in the interview. Tell them about your time, like if you were just, a poor undergrad. Right? You can tell a lot of good stories that you can just bring up in the story. So it falls on you a little bit to how as you prepare for
So it's up.
Yeah, you put.
So you're saying it's up to you to somehow bring it. They're not going to ask about it themselves. You have to be proactive.
Yep. Even in your job, even after I finished my first job, that's true that you don't get asked to be outside the U.S., but also when you always like to look at just what I did in the last couple of years. So even when I applied for the next position, I tried to bring stuff from my graduate program, from stuff earlier. So you kind of have to basically build up that story. So as you pick up your behavioral questions, cases, pick from different parts of your life, and that way you basically indirectly have told them your story.
Interesting.
That makes sense. So what about as you start, with the interviews, one of the things important as you apply the job is, of course, knowing your compensation, right? Knowing your benefits, for example, how much you're getting paid, or at what point you start talking about those. Do you wait until they start talking about it, or because is this like at the beginning stage of the process, or is it like a little bit down the road? So because you don't want to talk about something you're not supposed to talk, right? But at the same time, like, if an immigrant comes here in the US, they have a good experience, like in Turkey, right? Now they're applying the job here in the US, the culture may be different here than there, where, in Turkey, you may be expected to know things before, but here, not the case, so.
Sure. Good question. And in my, maybe I'll relate that to my experience. On my first interview process and for my entry level job, that was, brought up only by HR, like during the process, they basically ask you, what do you expect? And so you have, in every profession, you have ballparks, right? So you have these ranges. Being that my first job, you always have to kind of be, yeah, not to be too assertive. Just give a range and tell them this is what I understand this is the range for someone who graduates with a PhD in chemical engineering. They are typically in that range, so I'm expecting in that range. And typically they would come at that. If they're a big company, big corporate companies, they'll do. I've heard about cases where someone's coming from the outside the U.S. They end up giving that really lowball offers, but they take it. But in a couple of years, they prove themselves, and they either get they are, the market is competitive. Once you get experience, you become a competitive asset because you've learned, you've stuff. So companies keep you. Then you get you renegotiate your salary to be up, or you can find another job. So if you're a professional, I think at the beginning, yeah, you may not get the best offer at the beginning, but in the next job you will. So in my second part, after I finished my my 7 years at 3M, at each company I interviewed, they asked me what are you looking for, and I based it off where I was and expectation of an increase or a difference for me to motivate me to move. So I asked,
So,
yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, but at that stage, you could afford to be assertive. Like after you have some experience at an American company, then it's okay to be assertive, to actually,
Sure.
give hard numbers.
Yeah. At that point, you basically say, this is, you give a hard number. You could really say, this is my number, and plus the other benefits. You can really, because you have a good job, and you have these things you're looking for in a job, so you can really be assertive on that part. Definitely.
So coming to the differences between interviewing here in the States versus in other cultures in other countries, what are the main factors that would affect the outcome? What do the I know it's very hard because it could be dependent on the area that we talk about. It could be IT. For us, it's chemical engineers. We're both chemical engineers. So, but in general, what do you think stands out the most? Previous experience, education, skills?
Yeah. I think their employers are trying to look to answer two main questions: why you are looking for a job, and how do you fit? If those are the answers them during the interview process. Before the interview, the questions are: do you have the skills? Technical skills, especially if you're a technical field. So if you have the technical fit, they'll call you. If you've got the right, skills that you need, they'll call you most of the time. Once you get the interview, then they're asking why are you looking and what are you a good fit. So it's hard to know most of the time because it depends a lot on a lot of things, and the good thing here in the hiring and in the U.S. most of it is structured. So you have multiple steps, and now it's more common, like what things you get to be asked, what things you get to do. So you can essentially describe about yourself, and you try to be as honest as you can. At the end of the day, they put you on, especially when they bring you on site, they put you under microscope and under the microscope, and you're trying to see how you behave, and try how to go lunch with you, dinner, do things, and you're trying to see the other side of you, not just you could also talk about your personal background, your the other things that you like. So they're trying to, are they going to be having good time working with you, or are you going to be pain in the neck? So So it's, I think first thing you gotta have a good technical, and I think everyone in their background can assess that, can understand, what kind of skills can I get. At least when I remember, throughout my school experience, a couple of things that I've heard about is get involved, get straight A's in your in classes, but that's not going to get you a job. You want to do other things. You want to be involved in clubs. You want to have hobbies. You want to have leadership experiences, because they will look for that and they will ask for that. Or what did you do in this? For instance, I was involved. I think at some point with Engineers Without Borders, so that was helpful. I've got involved in different student associations. That we had the graduate student association that I was on this board. So there's all of these things that are helpful on your resumes. You're like, okay, this guy is not just a nerd, maybe learning and doing his classes. So these things helps. And also I had like research experience, doing like an undergraduate research, and also doing other things around campus.
So just to clarify, I guess it's not necessarily one versus another, right? So you cannot say just skills versus education, right? You just have to have your own story to present, saying that these are my skills. This is how I'm going to fit. So like you said, how good you're going to be fit to them, right? Like how. So it's not necessarily just just because you study, you work in one company competitor and have good experience does not mean they're gonna hire you because you know the business, because you work. It's just a matter of how you're gonna how much asset you're gonna be for them, in the future, right? Like you have to be able to pitch and sell yourself, right? So
sure. For each job, like so you're very correct, because I write basically when I apply for a different each job, I customize a resume for that job, because I have to, there's this job I can get something, this is it could be my contributions. It requires different knowledge, it's different skills, and not each job is equal. So my resume is a little different that way to basically, pitch that story in, as well as during the interview, with things that I'll focus on are more pertinent to that job. So yeah, I think once someone is in the field, after a while, they'll realize where their contributions could be and how they could be. So they have to treat each position a little differently, as they go and highlight that way. Yeah.
So one follow-up,
Actually,
if I may, just one follow-up on that. I think you quickly touched on it, so that you mentioned the education, right? So that I know personally people, when you go to college, right, during bachelor's, you study really hard. You want to get like 4.0 GPA or whatever in terms of American system. You want to get that. But in your experience of going through this many interviews, right, you had almost up to 30 interviews. Did somebody ever ask you that, or how impressive your GPA is, or how impressive your school record is, in terms of, oh, you got all the A's? Was it as important, or like, or how maybe how important in terms of importance it is? Or is it not? In my personal experience, I'm just gonna quick before you even answer. I had also, less than 10, but interviews within different companies, right? I personally, I never was asked about like what was my GPA or how did I do in my math class, economics class. I'm a business analyst by nature, so. But nobody even asked me that, so I'm just curious what was your experience?
Yeah, same thing. I think they don't ask. And that's how I remember. Like, when we were finishing from Turkey, that was like GPA was the number one skill to be asked. Like, but once you get here, it's not the GPA anymore.
Yeah.
Because it's a good thing. They look at it at the time they're looking at, because they're screening through, maybe sometimes hundreds of resumes, and that helps you. It does help at that point. But once you get to the point of the interview, that's not it's not being brought up, or that's just given, and then they'll focus on knowing you and what can you really bring to the table.
Sounds good. Great.
yeah, I think I think this is a good segue for my next question. It's something that I personally struggle, I'll be honest. So you mentioned GPA, whatever you do for classes, the projects you finish that you put on your resume for your first job, those are very clear-cut criteria, and you can work, you can succeed. But then what you mentioned, like, like what you had for 3M, you had lunches with them, you spent the whole, time, like the whole day probably with them, a lot of time spent, and they also look at your personality. So that's the thing that I want to ask. So if you come from another country, you have the technical skills, and that doesn't have to be engineering, by the way. You could be a lawyer. There's also some, technical knowledge. You gotta know the laws and things like that. So aside from all of that professional stuff, then there's the personality thing that companies do look at, right? They want to see if it's a good fit personality-wise, and how do you connect with the company culture. What do you suggest for that? Like, because that's very different in the U.S. If I'm not mistaken.
Companies, especially big companies, have been doing a lot of more research into personalities and types of people. When during my time in 3M, I went through different like a coaching about like how to, look at your personality and all stuff. So it was a nice, benefit. Large companies, they offer you to do like personal improvements. So you go through this, a lot of personality assessment. So there are companies that do it. There is online that you could do it, and you could better understand where your strengths are. I think one of the challenge that we have is how we can communicate. So, people, I think, as they grow up here, I see that they know how to express themselves a little better. They, especially in literature, as they go in school, they can elaborate more about themselves. The presentation skills are a bit of an advantage. But I think when going through these personality assessments helps identify. So, some people are familiar with like Myers-Briggs type of assessments. So you can get to be classified into 4 categories. As I recall, I think it could be like there's dominant, there's inspiring, cautious, supportive. They call them the DISC, standing for each beginning for each word. And also animals used in that shift, like shark, whale, octopus, dolphin. And they're basically attributing what things. So you get to be asked like about how do you handle different things. And maybe if you are, let's say, a bit more inspiring person, you focus on how to help others and how to basically, focus on the motivation. If you're more of a managerial type person, then you could be more like dominant, or what they call the shark, where you want people just to move. You're about deadlines, about getting things done on time and in order. So all of these, you can, if you go through that, and you can do that online, you can really highlight what your strengths and what could be, weaknesses, because we all have these strengths and weaknesses, and it's okay to be, frank about them. And I think it helps the employer really sees these attributes, and it helps you communicate and doing a good job at it. So,
so for example, Myers-Briggs, do you think it's a good idea to take that test ahead and go into interview knowing that the results of that test?
Sure.
You think that
definitely
could be useful?
Definitely, that's a very good assessment to take. There are websites online. Some of them are free, some of them are paid, but it gives you better picture of yourself, and you could use that. And really, any of the categories is good. I mean, even like the cautious for people on the technical world. Someone who's cautious maybe could be a great analytical person. Could be, if he's looking for an analytical job, that's what they need to be. That's the the folks. They don't need to be like dominant or or any of that. They need to basically be cautious and deliver essentially on the data. So you can use it for what, focus on, use that attribute to basically focus. And you're not going to be great at everything. So you can also highlight, there are places to improve and learn from.
Yeah, I think personality tests, it's a big subject. Maybe we can have a separate episode on it. I've read up quite a bit on Myers-Briggs. We can put a link at the bottom of this video if anyone is interested about Myers-Briggs, the Big 5 personality test. That's a very interesting topic, but let's not move way too far.
just a note and a question. Probably my last question. The note was probably for all the viewers, GPA. We kept saying GPA. Those who didn't go to US or didn't go to US, like Western type of education, GPA stands for grade point average. So which means like if you get like 100% in your score, that equals to 4. So your GPA of 4 means you did perfect in all all your classes. In other words. So that's just you could probably Google it. You would probably get much better explanation than my explanation. But that's what it means. And my last question to you, Ibrahim, in terms of we talked about actual interview process itself. Just a question about the what do I do as in terms of my homework to know about the companies, like right before the interview, right? What do I need to know going there? I mean, obviously I need to know about the job, but do also need to know more about the company, its history, or the area that I'm applying, or what is the expectation that you need to have some kind of knowledge that you're bringing with yourself to the interview?
Sure. You can always do research online on their websites, find out what some companies put a lot of information, some companies don't. So I had a couple of cases where, like, I had like one company that I interviewed recently that had a list of like values that they really, felt very heartedly about them. And, I even, so when I went to the interview, that's all they asked about. They asked about how do I fit with their values. So I mean, knowing these values, what they are, and how they highlight them, what are the things that, and I got to be asked questions about each different of these values, so that helped. Some other companies may not necessarily have that. It could be smaller companies, different way. LinkedIn now is a great tool to connect with people. So oftentimes there's a person 2 steps away within that field. It's not saying if it's or this company. You'll be surprised to find people within that circle. So you can get to connect with people and ask some questions. I remember even when I was at 3M, I asked, many people reached out to me through friends and who were about to get an interview in 3M. They asked me questions about what things I should be looking for and all that. So I think anyone would be willing to help them. Okay, this is what try to focus about. This is what this job could be. This is what So someone could be at the company can help a lot in helping you research. There's so much you can find. Limit stuff that you just can't find public online. I mean, you can networking would be. They used to tell us about networking back then before LinkedIn. I remember like when they was carry cards, network, but I'm like, what am I gonna pick up the phone and start calling people? But no, now you've got LinkedIn, which is a really nice blessing, really, So one of the things I'd highly recommend is have your LinkedIn profile up to date, and if you can also and always look to expand your network. Always add people. If you see posts, comment on them, share the post in your field. As well, if you can have people recommend on your page, so that would be great, because employers now do also go on LinkedIn and look you up. So even like right now, my resume has essentially also a link to my LinkedIn profile. So most of resumes right now are mainly electronic. So click in, they go to LinkedIn, so they get to see the other side of my professional social life. So I think online is a good. Nowadays we have good social networks that we could utilize in preparing.
Yeah, that's a great advice. And I know we've taken a lot of your time, but I actually have one more question. I think it's important to touch on that. You briefly mentioned behavioral questions in one of your answers. You mentioned that word, and I've seen that thrown around a lot. What exactly does that mean? What are they? How are they different? Behavioral questions. How are they different from other questions, and how can you prepare for them?
Sure. So behavioral questions are basically the situational questions. They're gonna ask about about a time that you had a situation and how you acted in it and what was the result. So you really have to answer the 3 things: what happened, what did you what did you do, and what was the outcome, the result of it. and they're looking to see how your thinking process, your honesty, your self-critique, and all of these things. And they're trying to basically learn about it other than just the technical side that you already have in your resume. So couple examples are like, you've got to say, if you have a challenge, how did you overcome it? If you were under stressful situation, or you had like a very strict deadline you had to meet, you were part of a team, you have a difficult person to work with, and also they ask, a lot of time about your weaknesses and strengths get to be asked quite often. So all of these things, if you do search online, that you'll find like a good list of these standard behavioral questions. And I've almost every interview I went to, I've been asked about. There were interviews that were very strictly behavioral, especially early ones, especially at the beginning of the campus interviews. They're very structured that way. The more you're further down the interview process, you get to be asked less of these behavioral, but certainly people bring them up. And they're just a way to, learn, see how you think and how you respond.
Yeah, it just seems like just like everything else, it boils down to a lot of work, preparing ahead, Googling on time, getting ready for those questions. Yeah, I think we don't want to take advantage of your time too much. I think this was a great overview for people who may be looking for jobs or interviewing these days. This was a pretty good introduction, I think. So maybe in the future we can talk more about this.
Yeah, I agree.
What do you think, Baron?
I agree. I agree, Amar. This was great, Ibrahim. I think we learned a lot from your academic experience, like background and your professional background. And I personally learned quite a bit, a few things actually. Though like I said, I also had experience here, and I also had experience of going through interviews here. So, but definitely every time we talk to guests, we learn a lot ourselves. So. And I really hope our viewers, our listeners who are also, watching this and listening, also learned a lot. And, definitely, like Ibrahim was saying, you can Google and you can get a lot more information about the steps, and, those would be useful. So we thank you so much, Ibrahim, for your time, for the wealth of knowledge you shared with us and expertise you had. For our regular listeners and viewers who are with us today and, listening to us, we thank you for that, for listening, for being with us today, and continue to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, like us, share, comment, provide your feedback, send us email on immigrantbazaar@gmail.com, and also subscribe to our YouTube channel. Give us comments, share your feedback. What else you would like to learn? Like we're doing this weekly. We have different subjects. We want to bring different people with immigrant experience so they can share it. They can help other immigrants who live in this country, who just came here, immigrated here, more about this. So yeah, thank you so much, and we'll look forward to be with everybody next time.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much, Ibrahim.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for hosting me. I guess you guys are doing a great job with these episodes. So good luck, and if you ever need to host me again, I would be happy to. So thank you.
Good.
All right, thank you. Thanks. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.